Hey guys, tonight we're easing back through the heavy wooden doors of a medieval sick room. You're lying flat on a straw-filled mattress, scratchy linen sticking to your skin, a draft creeping through the stone walls. There's a strong smell of musty herbs, candle wax, and something disturbingly metallic. A man leans over you. He has the steady hands of a craftsman, but he's not a doctor. He's a barber surgeon. He also pulls teeth, drains boils, and cuts hair, sometimes all in the same hour. And right now, he's carefully selecting the plumpest leech from a damp wooden box. He consults a stained parchment chart pinned to the wall, phases of the moon, dates of saints' days, planetary alignments. Because obviously, the success of your treatment depends on whether Venus is feeling moody tonight. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love seeing the map light up. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The leech wriggles happily on your wrist. You're not entirely sure what illness you have, but you're told it's because your blood is hot and moist, which apparently is not a compliment. The leech is here to balance you out. And by balance, they mean suck blood until you feel woozy and maybe stop complaining. Welcome to medieval medicine, where even the professionals are flying blind. The barber surgeon isn't a fraud. He's doing his best, working from centuries-old books and oral traditions passed down from monks and mystics. You hear him mutter something about humors and bile as he holds up a small bronze mirror to check your tongue. That color, it matters. Is it too pale? Too red? Too furry? It all means something, maybe. You might find it odd that a haircut and minor surgery are handled by the same person. But in the Middle Ages, the church forbade monks, who were among the few literate folks, from shedding blood. So barber surgeons stepped in to cover the bloody parts of medicine. You know, like slicing boils and sewing bones. And yes, they also gave the occasional shave. Busy man, truly. The instruments clink behind him. Hooked knives, bone saws, iron tweezers. You glance at the door, just in case you suddenly feel like sprinting. But don't worry. You probably won't survive this anyway. Meanwhile, another man in long robes arrives. He's a physician, much more respected, rarely touched patients. He preferred diagnoses from afar. He sniffs the air above your bed like he's evaluating wine. Then he pulls out a parchment full of planetary symbols and circles drawn with shaky ink. Your fate might depend on whether Saturn is ascendant in Aries. Astrology was no joke in this period. It was serious medicine. The stars didn't just rule your love life, they ruled your liver. Physicians would check your birth chart before prescribing anything. Born under Cancer? Watch your stomach. Capricorn? Your knees are doomed. Modern horoscopes feel almost tame in comparison. The room is dim, lit only by flickering candlelight and the soft red glow from the hearth. The smell of rosemary and dried marigold floats in from a pouch tied above your head. Some believed it repelled bad spirits. Or bad smells. Possibly both. You hear the word humors again, that mysterious set of bodily fluids that's supposed to govern everything from your health to your personality. Blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, each tied to elements, planets, and seasons. If you're too phlegmatic, maybe you're sluggish and prone to melancholy. Too much blood? You're probably dangerously cheerful. A clear sign that something's wrong. And don't even think about recovering if it's the wrong day of the week. Certain treatments were considered more effective on Tuesdays. Why? Mars ruled Tuesday, and Mars was spicy. Obviously. Historians still argue whether astrology was more diagnostic tool or social placebo. But one thing's clear, people in medieval Europe genuinely believed their fates were tangled up in the cosmos. There's a rustle of paper. The physician is reading from a thick volume bound in leather. You strain your eyes and spot the name, Galen. That ancient Roman guy is still calling the shots. even though he's been dead for over 1,000 years. In fact, most medical learning hasn't changed since the fall of Rome. Doctors just keep copying old stuff and occasionally getting creative with their own guesses. A whisper passes between your caregivers. You hear the word bleeding again. Apparently, the leeches weren't enough. The barber surgeon sharpened a small knife. You clench your teeth and think about fields of wheat or kittens or anything that isn't this moment. Suddenly, there's chanting from the hallway, a monk walking past with a censer, swinging it gently. The smoke curls into your room, thick with frankincense. Some say it purifies the air. Others say it just masks the stink of unwashed humans in a hospital with no plumbing. You close your eyes, wondering if you'll wake up better or at all. The odds aren't great. The best hope isn't medicine, it's rest, luck, and maybe a saint's favor. There's a little amulet tied to your wrist, something blessed by a relic or dipped in holy water. Because if the stars don't save you, maybe Saint Apollonia will. And that's just day one in medieval medicine. Hope you're feeling balanced. Because next comes an explanation of what those humors actually mean, and why your bad mood might just be black bile with attitude. You're still horizontal, still itchy from that straw mattress, and still not entirely sold on the leech thing. But it turns out your bloodletting was only the start. Because if the goal is to balance your humors, you've got to understand what those humors actually are. Welcome to the world of fluids, and not the good kind. The idea is simple. You're made up of 4 bodily fluids, each linked to different organs, emotions, and elements of nature. There's blood, which is warm and moist, connected to air and springtime. Sounds pleasant, right? It's associated with being cheerful, energetic, maybe a little too enthusiastic. If you've ever met someone who talks too much at breakfast, they were probably diagnosed with too much blood. Then there's yellow bile, hot and dry, linked to fire and summer. This one makes you ambitious, aggressive, and easily annoyed. Think of the guy who shouts at ox carts in traffic. Black bile is cold and dry, earthy, autumnal, and deeply moody. It's the humor blamed for melancholy. You know, the sad villager who writes poetry about dead birds. And finally, phlegm, cold and wet like winter. It gives you a calm, sluggish personality, someone who'd rather take a nap than milk the goats. The theory comes from Hippocrates and Galen, ancient thinkers who never met your goats, but still got to define your health. If your humors are out of whack, you're in trouble. A sneeze could be blamed on excess phlegm. A rash? Possibly too much yellow bile. And if you're feeling anxious, definitely a black bile day. So how do they fix you? By doing the exact opposite of whatever's going wrong. If you're too hot, they cool you down with cucumber compresses, cold baths, or making you sit in the shade and think about snow. Too cold? You get wrapped in warm cloths, fed spicy food, and made to sweat under wool blankets. This is the logic balanced by extremes. Let's say you come in with a fever. That's considered a hot illness. Your treatment might include lettuce, vinegar, and lots of quiet time. But if you have a cough, too much phlegm, they'll crank the heat, maybe with pepper or onions to dry you out like a medieval raisin. Historians still argue whether the humor system was more metaphor than medicine. But it ruled every diagnosis, every prescription, and every medical student's nightmares for centuries. You know that little diagram with the 4 quadrants: sanguine, choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic? That's not just psychology. That was how medieval doctors decided what to do to your actual body. Your personality dictated your prescriptions. If you were too earthy, they might tell you to spend time in the fresh air. If you were watery, maybe avoid fish. Seriously. There were even foods classified by their humoral qualities. Apples were cold and dry. Beef was warm and moist. Wine, hot and dry. Watercress, probably trouble. So meals became medicine, or at least excuses for some very odd culinary pairings. You could be prescribed lentils and melon for your temperament, or denied pork because your gallbladder's acting up, apparently. You glance across the sick room and see another patient chewing on a licorice root. Not because he likes it, he's been told it will calm his bile. Nearby, a woman is sipping something thick and green from a clay bowl. It smells like boiled hay and anxiety. She calls it a cooling tonic. You make a mental note to pretend to sleep if anyone offers you a taste. Occasionally, doctors try to drain out a specific humor. If your skin looked yellow, they assumed yellow bile was rising. The solution? Induce vomiting. Or maybe diarrhea. Either way, it's a great day to not be conscious. Sometimes they even added things, like encouraging a patient to bleed more to match the lunar tide, because obviously your spleen knows when it's a full moon. And don't get too smug if you're feeling okay. Even healthy people were encouraged to cleanse their humors seasonally, like a bodily spring cleaning. Better safe than phlegmy. Your head spins, not just from the blood loss, but from the realization that everyone around you is just guessing. Smart guesses, old guesses, guesses in Latin, but still very much guesses. Even the treatments contradict each other. One doctor says hot wine for stomach pain. Another swears by cold vinegar. It depends on their teacher, their book, and maybe whether they skipped breakfast. One of the fringe beliefs you overhear today? A healer claims that laughter makes black bile shrink. So she tickles her patients. Right there, in public, with a feather. The patients don't laugh, but they do try to leave. Another insists that certain people are just born imbalanced, especially if they were born under unlucky stars. Babies born during eclipses? Good luck, kid. And just when you think it couldn't get weirder, someone suggests that sneezing is your soul's way of releasing sinful excess. You try not to sneeze for the rest of the week, just in case. The truth is, for all the parchment charts, for all the herbal lists and astrological guides, medieval medicine is deeply unsure of itself. It clings to ancient theories with both hands because, well, that's what they have. But even in this chaos, there's a method to the madness. People believed in the body as part of the world, tied to nature, seasons, moods, and elements. It's poetic in a way. Almost beautiful. Almost. Until they bring in the urine flasks. But that's a horror for another section. You're roused just before dawn by the clatter of sandals on stone. A monk glides into the room, robes brushing the cold floor, carrying a tray lined with glass flasks. Each one contains a different patient's urine, shimmering gold in the lamplight like some twisted sunrise cocktail menu. Yours is the third from the left, still warm, which is apparently important. He picks it up carefully, squints through it like a jeweler appraising a gem, and gives a small, knowing grunt. Congratulations. You're being diagnosed by P. This is uroscopy, a widely practiced medieval diagnostic method where physicians examine the color, clarity, smell, and sometimes even taste of urine. Yes, taste. But only the bold or the particularly enthusiastic. Your monk, who doubles as a medic, because why not, is looking for signs of imbalance. A pale, watery tint, too much phlegm, deep orange with sediment, possibly an overload of yellow bile. If it's foamy, streaked, or oddly scented, that might be divine punishment, or just kidney stones. Maybe both. He holds your sample up against a uroscopy wheel, a kind of ancient color chart, not unlike those used at paint stores, except this one's for diagnosing plague. The wheel has categories like cloudy with red specks and smells of burnt feathers. You watch his eyes flick back and forth between your P and the chart. It's like watching someone try to match a foundation shade, except the outcome could involve bloodletting. Now, in a world without MRIs or blood panels, this actually kind of makes sense. Urine is a mirror of internal health, but the medieval approach adds a cosmic twist. After the urine check, the monk consults a zodiac chart to complete your diagnosis. Because obviously, your kidneys don't function the same way if the moon is in Leo. Each zodiac sign governed a different body part. Aries, head, Taurus, neck and throat. Virgo, intestines. Pisces, feet. So if you've got a stomachache during a Scorpio moon, it's practically a sign from the heavens that you're doomed, or need more cumin. There's even a rule against treating certain body parts while their corresponding sign is in power. You've got a sore knee. Better wait until Capricorn isn't looming over your horoscope like a judgmental goat. Historians still argue whether astrology and medicine was truly believed or just a handy scheduling tool. But either way, it shaped when, where, and how you were treated. Your own urine could betray you, but the stars might still have the final say. You glance down the corridor and notice a table cluttered with more glass flasks, some tinged green, others reddish-brown. Each has a wax-sealed parchment tag with the patient's name, symptoms, and, yes, star chart. There's even a rumor going around that some towns hire astrologers specifically for urine readings. One man claims his doctor told him he was incompatible with Mars and should avoid onions. You're not sure what's more troubling, the diagnosis or the fact that he listened. Back in your sickbed, the monk leans closer. He's sniffing the top of your flask now. You try not to make eye contact. After a long pause, he murmurs something about heat in the liver and walks off toward the apothecary shelf. The room smells strongly of rosemary, lavender, and oddly old cheese. You realize that herbal infusions and dried potions are being arranged by planetary association. Each herb, each root, is linked to a celestial body. Mars herbs for blood problems, Venus herbs for fertility, Saturn herbs for, you guessed it, melancholy. So yes, if you're unwell, someone might prescribe ground licorice root soaked in rose water, not based on your symptoms, but because Saturn is apparently cranky this week. Some fringe healers take this further. You hear whispers about a man in the next village who makes amulets from crushed herbs mixed with, wait for it, his own hair. He says it tunes the body to the universe. You're hoping never to meet him. But back here, under the monastery roof, everything is routine. Your treatment plan is finalized. Warm mint tea to soothe your cold stomach, avoidance of pears, too moist, and a tiny wax seal stamped with your astrological diagnosis. You're told to wear it under your tunic to promote cosmic balance. You nod slowly, because arguing with a monk who handles other people's bodily fluids for a living feels like a bad idea. Some patients get different orders. The man coughing in the next bed has been told to recite a prayer to Saint Sebastian every morning. Another is being wrapped in wet cloths soaked in vinegar under a full moon. You suspect half of this is guesswork, the other half theater, but no one seems to mind. There's something comforting about the ritual of it all. The certainty in the gestures. The way people interpret your pee like tea leaves, then look to the sky as if waiting for a divine update. In a world without certainty, rituals offer structure, even if they're, well, absurd. You hear a novice whisper, "This one's got Saturn in retrograde," as he points to another flask. You make a note to keep yours guarded, just in case retrograde is contagious. Then something catches your eye, a small framed image on the wall of a man with various zodiac signs drawn over his body. It's called the Zodiac Man, a popular medical illustration used to map which signs ruled which organs. It's equal parts art, science, and total speculation. But it's everywhere, in hospitals, schools, and the occasional outhouse. As the morning sun slips through the high-arched windows, you realize something. These people aren't pretending to know everything. They're doing what they can, with what they have, under the enormous pressure of keeping each other alive. Even if that means reading your urine like a horoscope and prescribing garlic baths under Mars. And for now, your bottle's been placed back on the tray, tagged and filed. Diagnosis complete. But your treatment is only just beginning. Next comes the part where you learn how to be a doctor, with zero hands-on experience, but lots of Latin. You're upright for the first time in days, wrapped in a ruffled cloak and handed a scroll. Not because you're healed, but because you've had a revelation. You want to become a doctor. Maybe it was the man sniffing your urine who inspired you. Maybe it was the leech trauma. Either way, you're determined to help people, even if that means spending years trying to understand which herb cools your bile. So you enroll at a university. Lucky you. Except this is the Middle Ages, and university doesn't mean hands-on practice or long nights in a cadaver lab. It means sitting on a stone bench in a freezing lecture hall, listening to a professor read aloud from ancient texts, probably Galen, Hippocrates, or Avicenna, all of whom are extremely dead. You aren't even allowed to ask questions most of the time. You just memorize. In Latin. A lot of Latin. You begin your studies in the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Because before you're trusted with a human spleen, you need to be able to construct a proper argument about why you're touching it. Eventually, you move to the quadrivium, geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, and music. Yes, music. Because in this worldview, harmony and ratios aren't just for choirs. They explain the human body. The spine is like a lute, they say. A well-tuned body must also sound sweet. Kind of poetic. Also kind of useless when someone has smallpox. Historians still argue whether medieval medical training was truly scientific or just theological theater. But most agree that it was, at best, a cerebral experience, and at worst, a medieval book club with bloodletting on the side. Let's say you graduate. Now you're a Magister Medicinae. Your patients will assume you have supernatural knowledge. And you can quote Galen with flair that you've never actually seen a human lung in person. Because dissection, that's forbidden, at least in much of Europe. The church has rules about tampering with the body, especially dead ones, so you might practice on pigs. Or watch one sanctioned dissection per year, standing in a packed crowd, try not to faint from the smell while a robed scholar gestures vaguely at organs. The body, in theory, is sacred, opening it unnatural. So most of what you know about anatomy is guesswork, built on animal comparisons and ancient texts that often contradict each other. One professor tells you the liver has 5 lobes. Another swears it's 7. You nod at both, because arguing in Latin is exhausting. To pass your final exams, you need to explain what causes illness. Spoiler, it's always the humors, or bad air, or planetary misalignment, or maybe all 3. You write essays on the properties of basil and debate whether headaches come from brain heat or sinful thoughts. There's a rumor circulating that one bold student tried to challenge the humor theory. He didn't pass. Another forgot to quote Aristotle. He vanished. Once licensed, you earn your robes, your fancy seal, and a healthy amount of anxiety. You're finally allowed to treat real patients who expect you to be a mix of scholar, priest, and miracle worker. But you're also competing with local healers, herbalists, and barber surgeons who, unlike you, actually know how to set a bone. Still, your education gives you status. You're invited to noble courts. You consult with abbots. You're paid in coins, bread, or sometimes a goat. You nod sagely when people describe their symptoms, then prescribe rhubarb root for fevers and advise bloodletting on Tuesdays. In towns without a physician, your arrival causes a stir. Children gawk at your robes. Patients bring you their dreams, their boils, their overripe urine samples. One woman wants you to bless her cat. Another wants you to remove a devil from her knee. And what do? You pull out your charts, your little leather bag of dried herbs, and your most confident voice. Then you guess. Because that's what medieval medicine is, a delicate performance of educated uncertainty. Some fringe medical schools start experimenting with new methods. In southern Italy, for instance, the Salerno School of Medicine dares to write original material. Their texts cover women's health, hygiene, and even dietetics, centuries ahead of their time. But the rest of Europe still clings tightly to the past. You once sat through a full lecture on the 6 non-naturals, a medieval concept of health habits. These include air, food, and drink, sleep and wakefulness, motion and rest, excretions and emotions. Sounds reasonable until someone explains that too much dancing could unbalance your bile. In your more desperate moments, you wish someone would just cut open a body and look. But you keep those thoughts quiet. The last student who said that now works in a stable. You hear stories of Arabic scholars in far-off cities who conduct dissections regularly and write volumes of precise anatomical diagrams. You dream of seeing one, of reading texts that aren't 1,000 years old and smelling faintly of mold. But for now, you're a licensed medieval doctor. You can finally hang your shingle. Not that it helps when someone walks in with a sword wound and you realize you have no idea where the spleen actually is. So what do? You call for the barber surgeon. He'll bring the saw. Your new life as a freshly minted medieval doctor begins not in a royal court or some glamorous noble manor, but a drafty stone building that smells like garlic and mildew. Welcome to the hospital. And not just any hospital, this is a medieval hospital. Which means if you're hoping for privacy, anesthesia, or even a separate bed, you may want to lower your expectations significantly. First things first, this hospital is run by monks. Almost all hospitals in Europe during this time are attached to religious institutions. They're called infirmaries, and they serve a mixture of purposes. Some house the poor, others care for the old, and a few attempt to treat the sick. But healing is not the primary goal. Salvation is. You step inside and see rows of patients laid out in a single massive hall. The beds are packed closely together, the air thick with the combined odors of sweat, illness, and an overly enthusiastic use of rosemary. A crucifix looms at the far end of the room. The walls echo with chants and coughs. And let's be clear, if you're expecting surgery here, you're out of luck. Most treatments are spiritual. Prayers, blessings, holy relics tucked beneath pillows. If someone's lucky, they get a sip of watered wine or a piece of dry bread soaked in herbs. You glance over at a monk carefully applying a paste to a man's forehead. It's a mixture of powdered rose petals, clay, and honey. It probably won't help his migraines, but it'll keep the flies away. That woman clutching a rosary? She has a broken leg. She's been prescribed 3 Hail Marys and a poultice made from mashed figs. There's also a slice of toasted bread tied to her ankle. No one's quite sure what it does, but it's a common treatment. Historians still argue whether medieval hospitals were places of healing or just a holding pattern for death. Some were impressively organized. Others were just warehouses for the barely breathing. One thing they all had in common: infection was everywhere. There's no understanding of germs yet, just a vague fear of bad air or miasma. So windows are opened wide, even in winter, to let in the good breezes. Unfortunately, they also let in birds, rats, and the occasional confused goat. Cleanliness is aspirational. The monks wash their hands occasionally, but the idea of sterilizing instruments? Not on the radar. Bandages are reused. Bowls are shared. And if you get hungry, there's a pot of stew simmering in the corner that's been there since Tuesday of last week. One patient lies motionless under a blanket. You're not sure if he's asleep or just very politely deceased. The nurse monk beside him is reading from a psalter. There's a chance that prayer will do more than the garlic poultice currently melting into his chest. Every now and then, a physician like you will be invited in. You glide across the floor in your heavy robes, clutching your medical bag like it holds actual wisdom. The monk leading you whispers the case: fever, weakness, possible possession. You nod solemnly and proceed to diagnose a cold stomach. Your solution: bloodletting and boiled nettles. The patient stares at you like you just suggested setting his shoes on fire. Still, some patients swear by the hospital. They like the food, the warmth, the quiet prayers. Others come to die surrounded by incense and clean sheets. Well, cleanish. It's the best care available, and sometimes people even survive. There are a few hospitals that buck the trend. In Milan, one facility tries isolating patients with contagious diseases. In Spain, Jewish and Islamic hospitals include actual medicinal baths. But in most of Europe, you're lucky if your straw mattress isn't already occupied by something that squeaks. Here's a quirky twist. Some hospitals have pet cats. Not for therapy, Though honestly, a purring cat might be the most effective treatment here. But for catching rats, you befriend one named Thomas. He likes your cloak and sleeps on your patient's pillow. You pretend this is a new form of feline therapy. It's not, but the patient seems calmer, so you roll with it. Sometimes you're sent on house calls. A local blacksmith with gout. A baker with a swollen jaw. You arrive, inspect their urine, check the position of the moon, and prescribe bread soaked in vinegar or mashed leeks applied behind the ears. You're basically a well-dressed guest machine with decent handwriting. Back at the hospital, you're given your own corner, a small wooden desk near the herb shelf. You flip through pages of recipes: willow bark tea for headaches, ground mustard for chest pain, crushed emerald, yes, emerald for plague. You don't have emeralds. No one does. But it's good to have goals. One day, a noble woman is brought in pale, silent, dressed in fur. The monks panic. This is a VIP. You're summoned at once, shown her chart, and told she hasn't spoken in 3 days. You lean in, whisper a diagnosis of humoral imbalance, and suggest rose petal compresses. It works. Not because of the petals, but because she finally gets a quiet room and a break from her in-laws. The longer you work here, the more you realize that medieval medicine is about managing expectations. You won't cure most people, but you can soothe them. Give them something to hold on to, a ritual, a prayer, a story. Sometimes that's enough. As night falls, candles are lit. The room glows with a soft golden hue. A monk walks between the beds, humming a hymn. You hear a patient mutter thanks, holding a warm bowl of barley water like it holy nectar. You lean back, scribble in your notes, and try not to think about how often those leeches are reused. Tomorrow, you're being sent to a battlefield, and you'll need a whole new set of skills. You wake to a messenger banging on the monastery gate. He's out of breath, splattered in mud, and clutching a rolled parchment with a wax seal. War has broken out again. You barely finish your lentils before you're packed onto a mule and sent to the front lines. Congratulations. You're now a battlefield medic. You ride for hours through soggy fields and cramped dirt roads, arriving at what can only be described as a very unorganized mess of tents, shouting men, and carts overflowing with limbs, both attached and not. The smell hits you first. Sweat, blood, manure, and something uniquely horrifying that you quickly identify as open wound in humid weather. Your clinic is a canvas tent supported by hope and a few sticks. Inside are piles of linen rags, rusty instruments, and a bucket of what was probably wine once. There's no running water, no soap, and absolutely no time for charts. The first soldier stumbles in, supported by 2 comrades. He's been struck by an arrow to the shoulder. You nod like you've seen this before, even though your only real experience was watching a monk treat a stubbed toe. You assess the wound, arrow still embedded, blood sluggish but steady. The soldier's shaking, probably from shock, or fear, or the fact that he's being treated by someone who just yesterday was prescribing rose petal compresses for indigestion. So what do? You pull out the wine. Not to drink, although the temptation is real, but to pour over the wound. It's your best antiseptic, and by best, we mean your only one. Then you grab a pair of forceps and try to extract the arrow. No anesthesia, just a leather strap for him to bite. He screams. You tell him to think of his favorite stew. You try not to vomit. Eventually, the arrow slides free. You pack the wound with moss, yes, moss, because it's absorbent and, weirdly, kind of works. Then you wrap it with linen strips and whisper a quick prayer. There's a good chance he'll live. There's also a good chance he'll get gangrene. You've done what you can. Welcome to trauma care, 14th century style. Another soldier limps in. His leg is twisted at a horrifying angle. Fracture, clearly. Maybe worse. You've read about this somewhere around page 187 of that medical compendium with the beetles squashed in the margin. You pull 2 pieces of wood from the supply pile, Splint the leg as best you can, and tie it off with twine. He thanks you, kind of. Or maybe he curses you. It's hard to tell through the groaning. And then comes the next patient. And the next. The flow never stops. Some men have clean cuts. Others are shredded by maces or scorched by fire arrows. One man comes in with a dented helmet and no memory of his own name. You check his pupils and tell him to rest. That's the extent of your neurology training. You overhear another medic recommending boiling pitch to seal wounds. You politely decline, having seen that particular method end in permanent screaming. Instead, you reach for a poultice made of garlic and wine-soaked bread. Is it scientifically sound? Probably not. But it keeps the flies off, and that's half the battle. There's a fringe healer nearby who swears by crushed worms as a healing salve. Another dabs wounds with sheep's fat and recites psalms. You try to stay neutral, even when one of them sprinkles a bit of ash on a wound and declares it cleansed by the fire of St. Maurice. Historians still argue whether battlefield medicine was innovative or just barely survival-level chaos. In truth, it was both. Some methods, like boiling instruments, emerged here out of desperation. Others, like applying moldy bread to wounds, were shockingly close to discovering antibiotics. You begin to see patterns. You learn which wounds are fatal, which ones can wait, which men are already beyond help. You make peace with the idea that you can't save them all. At night, you fall asleep to the sound of groaning, wind snapping through tent fabric, and the soft drip of blood onto dirt. But there are moments of hope, too. A young archer with a shoulder wound sits up and cracks a joke. A knight with a smashed hand still manages to grip your forearm in thanks. A drummer boy with a deep gash recovers enough to hum a marching tune. And then there's the soldier with a belly wound. You know it's bad. There's nothing you can do. So you hold his hand, give him a sip of wine, and stay until his breathing stops. That, too, is medicine. You start keeping notes. A little leather book, filled with sketches, observations, guesses. You document which herbs help slow bleeding, which poultices reduce fever, which prayers calm shaking hands. You're learning, fast and grim. One evening, you find yourself stitching a wound with horsehair thread under candlelight, and you realize your hands no longer shake. You become a surgeon, not by diploma, but by necessity. As you pack your tools for the night, a rider arrives. New orders. You're being recalled. Something about pestilence. Some sickness spreading in the towns. You glance at the heap of bandages in your tent. You already know. The plague is coming. You don't even have time to unpack your surgical tools before the next crisis unfolds. The streets are quiet. Too quiet. Shops shuttered. Bells tolling more often than they should. You see smoke curling up from behind the apothecary and wonder if someone is purifying the air or burning bodies. The town smells of rosemary, unwashed flesh, and panic. The plague has arrived. And no one, not kings, not monks, not even you, the very image of a leech-scarred, blood-letting, herb-sniffing doctor, knows what to do. People call it many names. The Great Mortality, God's Wrath, the Black Death. But really it's guesswork all the way down. Some say it's bad air. Others say it's divine punishment. Still others blame specific groups or unlucky cats. Which, yes, leads to a lot of very confused and very dead cats. Historians still argue whether medieval responses helped or worsened the outbreak. But one thing's for sure, fear spreads faster than the disease. You walk the streets, avoiding the sick as best you can. It doesn't help that you don't know how it spreads. Touch? Breath? Proximity to sinful thoughts? Every guess is just plausible enough to feel right. You wrap a scarf soaked in vinegar around your face. A fellow physician passes by, his beak plague mask stuffed with dried flowers, like a walking herb garden with a death count. A patient collapses outside the church. You rush to help, but hesitate. Your training has never covered this. The boils on his neck are purple-black, swollen, warm. His breathing is shallow, his eyes glassy. He's dead within the hour. Soon more follow. The town goes quiet again, this time in dread. You're summoned by the mayor. He wants answers, solutions, miracles. You offer garlic, vinegar, a sermon if that helps. Nothing does. And then come the treatments. Oh, the treatments. Leeches again. Because why not? Some physicians recommend bleeding the patient to release the poison. Others demand fasting, or purgatives that cause vomiting, or enemas made from rosewater and ox bile. You try not to gag as you administer the third one that day. One particularly bold friar insists that flagellation is the cure. He walks barefoot through the streets, lashing himself and calling others to do the same. The townsfolk oblige, hoping that enough pain might appease whatever force sent this disease. It doesn't work, but the scabs are impressive. You retreat to your notes, scouring them for patterns. You notice that the rich are dying just as fast as the poor, that the cheerful succumb as quickly as the bitter. No amount of positive humors can save someone once the boils bloom. You treat a woman who wears a pomander necklace, a hollow orb filled with cloves and ambergris. She insists it's keeping her safe. You later attend her funeral. She was buried with a pomander. You're not sure if that's ironic or just very on brand. One fringe healer suggests carrying a dead toad in your pocket. Another advises drinking crushed emeralds mixed with wine. You ask if they've tried not dying. No one laughs. There's debate, furious whisper debate, about where the plague came from. Some blame travelers. Others, foul winds from east. Some say it started with a bad conjunction of Mars and Jupiter. You can't argue with celestial gossip. One nobleman hires 3 astrologers just to find a day when it's safe to go outside. It never comes. You visit the local leper house, only to find that it's full of plague victims now. The distinction between diseases has blurred. A cough is no longer just a cough. It's a possible death sentence. Even the monks are hesitant to offer last rites. Your hands crack from constant washing in wine and brine. You lose weight. Sleep becomes a rumor. You start dreaming of pustules. And when you're not dreaming, you're praying. Or at least bargaining. But amidst the despair, there's strange comfort in the rituals. Hanging posies in windows. Burning rosemary. Ringing bells. These habits don't help, but they feel like doing something. One day, a child hands you a hand-drawn cure, a picture of a sun smiling over a field of daisies. You tape it to your door. Oddly enough, that's the only room where no one falls sick. You start experimenting. Honey compresses, moldy bread poultices, cold baths, rest. Surprisingly, rest helps. So does isolation. You begin separating the sick from the healthy. It feels revolutionary. It's just common sense. But common sense is rare these days. Eventually, the town begins to empty. Those who can flee do. The sick stay. Or collapse. You stay too, mostly because you've forgotten how to leave. Weeks pass, then months. The death rate slows. Whether from immunity or exhaustion, you're not sure. But one day, you realize you haven't seen a fresh boil in a week. A strange silence follows. The silence of relief, not dread. You look around the town square. It's empty, save for a dog nosing through scraps and a few crows that look far too comfortable. You're still alive. Somehow. A survivor of medicine's greatest guessing game. And guess what? You're being summoned again. This time, someone's got a headache they think is caused by a cursed relic. Welcome back to normal. You barely had time to scrub the memory of blackened boils and vinegar masks from your mind before someone drags you to a candlelit hut, swearing their sister's cough was caused by a curse. Not bad air. Not overwork. Curse. Specifically, from the neighbor who looked at her funny last Sunday. You sigh deeply. Welcome to the other side of medieval medicine, where spiritual ailments are just as real as physical ones, and witchcraft, demons, and relics are all fair game in the diagnosis. The sister is lying in bed, pale and shivering. The family has already tried all the obvious cures: rosewater, boiled sage, prayers, and stuffing a dead mole under her mattress to draw out the evil. Now they want you to check if a spirit is stuck in her throat. You check her pulse. It's weak. You peek at her tongue. Dry. Then you open your medical bag and pretend you're not reaching for the same herbs you use for the plague, because if they believe a ghost is involved, they'll want you to do something mystical. You light a small candle and mutter a prayer, not a real one, just something vaguely Latin sounding. She relaxes. Her mother clasps her hands in thanks. They call it a blessing. You call it good bedside manner. This is where medicine and magic blur. You're not just a doctor anymore. You're expected to understand curses, maleficium, and divine punishment. Was that fever caused by too much phlegm, or by looking at a hexed mirror? Hard to say. You've heard stories, some true, some embellished, of patients healed by the bones of saints. There's St. Cuthbert's finger, St. Margaret's veil, even St. Apollonia's teeth, often carried in little boxes or displayed behind altar glass. Touching these relics is said to drive out demons, cure fevers, and occasionally mend heartbreak. One patient tells you she feels better only after placing a splinter from St. Roche's femur under her pillow. You ask if anything else changed. Yes, she says. My mother stopped making me eat cabbage soup, so that might have helped too. Historians still argue whether the belief in relics was spiritual placebo or a legitimate cultural prescription. But either way, it worked. For some, occasionally. Probably not the guy who drank powdered martyr bones mixed with goat's milk. He did not make it. You visit a chapel one evening. Inside, the priest shows you a reliquary, a glass orb filled with what he claims is the dried tear of the Virgin Mary. You lean in, squint, and see what is almost certainly a raisin. You nod respectfully. Back at the market, you overhear a woman hawking charms for plague prevention and demonic indigestion. She's sold out by midday. Then there's folk medicine. Entire books of it, passed down in whispers. A cow that won't produce milk. Someone probably hexed it. Baby cries too much. Might be a changeling. There's a ritual for that. Bury an egg under the threshold and wait 3 nights. If the crying stops, it worked. If not, you try another egg. Or get a priest. Speaking of priests, they're often the first responders to any medical mystery. A headache could be caused by sin, after all. You're called to assist in exorcisms more than once. Most involve chanting, holy water, and a bucket in case the spirit exits the body with dinner. One woman screams whenever the Bible is read aloud. The priest is convinced it's the devil. You suspect she's just annoyed by his voice. You prescribe silence and honey tea. It works. And then there's the witch panic. Oh yes. You visit a village where 3 women are accused of spreading disease by walking backward while muttering in rhyme. The local bailiff asks if you've ever seen such behavior lead to fever. You politely suggest he look into the local water source. It's green and bubbling. You tread carefully. Too much skepticism, and people think you're in league with the devil. Too much enthusiasm, and someone ends up tied to a stake. In private, you compare notes with a fellow physician. He confesses that half his prescriptions are based on trial and error, the other half on whatever made the patient's mother nod approvingly. You exchange a knowing look and sip your nettle tea. One fringe theory you encounter, the idea that certain gemstones can absorb illness. You're gifted a garnet against melancholy and a small chunk of amethyst to calm the humors. You carry them in your pouch, mostly for show. They glitter nicely when you pull out your herbs. Then there's the case of the man who believes his back pain is caused by a sin he committed in his youth. You ask what it was. He hesitates, then says he once coveted his neighbor's ox. You nod solemnly and prescribe mint poultices and confession. He returns the next day, smiling and without pain. Coincidence? Probably. But you note it down anyway. You start to see a pattern. Belief itself is a powerful medicine. Whether it's in God, nature, relics, or toad-filled satchels, if people believe they're healing, sometimes they actually do. Mind over matter, medieval style. So you learn to speak in symbols. You time your prescriptions with phases of the moon. You recommend rose incense to clear the spirit, even if what you're actually doing is masking the smell of foot rot. And when a mother thanks you for banishing the fever demon from her son, you smile and nod. Because in this world, healing isn't just about the body, it's about the story you tell with it. You scribble in your notebook, relics equals placebo with nicer packaging. Just then, a knock at the door. Someone has a terrible headache. They think it's caused by evil spirits, or maybe their skull is full of bad air. You steel yourself. It might be time for trepanning. The patient groans from under a thick wool blanket. His wife whispers, the spirits are trapped in his head. A local friar chimes in helpfully, or he's got a demon lodged behind the left ear. You, however, are scanning his face, noting the clenched jaw, the glassy stare, the pale, sweaty skin. He's in agony. And there it is again, the throb of medieval logic drumming in the back of your mind. If there's pressure inside the skull, let it out. Trepanning. If you're unfamiliar, it's the practice of drilling a hole into someone's skull to relieve pressure, headaches, or spiritual congestion. Yes, this is real. And yes, people really did it. In fact, it's one of the oldest surgical practices in history. Even older than leeches, believe it or not. You ask the family to leave the room. Not because they shouldn't watch, but because you'd rather they not faint into your herbal supplies. You sit beside the patient, lay out your tools, and choose the flattest spot on the skull. A steady hand, a sharp chisel, a mallet, and no anesthesia. He's tied down, firmly. It's not personal, it's just that thrashing tends to make this procedure a lot messier than it already is. You place the point of the trepanation tool gently on his scalp, murmur something meant to sound reassuring, and start scraping away layers of skin and bone. The grinding sound is something you won't forget, like chewing gravel, but much closer to your ears. Somewhere between horror and miracle, a small round flap of bone is lifted free. There's no geyser of evil spirits, no dramatic scream, just the quiet. His breathing slows. His face softens. It worked. You're not sure. But you clean the wound with wine and cover it with a strip of boiled linen. Historians still argue whether trepanning actually helped, or if the surviving patients were just the lucky few. But in the moment, it feels like success. You allow yourself a rare moment of pride. You also make a mental note. Never attempt this during a thunderstorm. The last time someone did, the patient shouted that he'd heard angels yelling in Latin, which is rarely a good sign. You've seen trepanning used for more than just headaches. Epilepsy, melancholy, even unruly thoughts. One surgeon swore it calmed argumentative husbands. Another believed it cured excessive dreaming. You're tempted to try it on your own nightmares. There's a growing belief, especially among fringe practitioners, that certain vapors get trapped in the skull and must be released for sanity to return. You once watched a man trepan during a full moon, with herbs stuffed into the opening to absorb wandering thoughts. He went home singing and swearing off cider. Jury's still out on whether that counts as healing. But most people are still wary of any treatment that involves the skull. Toothaches, however, those are fair game. Which brings us to dentistry, or what passes for it. You meet a farmer complaining of mouth demons. Translation, abscessed tooth. His jaw is swollen, his breath could slay a rooster, and he's been stuffing mint leaves into his mouth for a week with no relief. You examine his gums and gently press the worst tooth. He kicks the stool over. You nod. It's coming out. There are no fine instruments here. Just forceps, if you're lucky, or iron pliers borrowed from a blacksmith. You heat them slightly to sterilize them, though really, it just makes the metal look dramatic. The patient is advised to bite down on a stick, say a prayer, and brace himself. 1 strong pull. 2. A sickening crunch. The tooth pops free, trailing blood and possibly something you don't want to name. He passes out. You rinse the socket with vinegar and leave him to sleep. This, surprisingly, is considered a successful dental procedure. You once encountered a healer who tried burning out cavities with a heated nail. The smell lingers in your memory. So does the screaming. Still, there are gentler remedies. Herbal tooth powders made from sage and salt. Clove oil for numbing. Even mouthwashes made of urine. Yes, you read that right. Not recommended. Even then. Another popular fringe method? Whispering charms while poking the gums with a twig from a sacred tree. Doesn't work. But you won't tell the healer that while he's waving you branches near your patient's mouth. Back to the skull. You see patients with mysterious head noises. Buzzing, hissing, even whispers. Some are treated with trepanning. Others are simply given valerian root in a quiet room. One man is convinced he hears angels dictating recipes. You prescribe sleep and no more fermented rye. Eventually, your reputation grows. People begin coming to you not just for cures, but for insight. What's really wrong with me? They ask. Why does my head hurt when I argue with my mother-in-law? You suggest fewer arguments and more time tea. They call it wisdom. One day, a knight visits you with a dent in his helmet and the same dent in his head. He's dizzy, forgetful, prone to quoting bad poetry. You don't drill this one. Instead, you advise rest, dark rooms, and quiet contemplation. He returns a month later, claiming he's written a sonnet about mustard. You chalk it up as healing. You reflect on what you've learned. The head, the teeth, the skull, they're all terrifying frontiers, but people trust you to navigate them. Even when your map is mostly old theories, monk notes, and guesswork. You close your ledger for the day and mutter thanks that you still have all your own teeth. Then you hear the screams. A midwife bursts in. There's a birth gone wrong, and they need someone, anyone, with steady hands. The midwife doesn't wait for permission. She grabs your sleeve, breathlessly listing symptoms, stuck for hours, too much bleeding, the baby isn't crying. You don't need convincing. You grab your satchel and follow her at a brisk pace, your boots splashing through muddy alleys as shouts echo behind you. You arrive at a small cottage, already heavy with the scent of herbs, smoke, and blood. Inside it's chaos, but practiced chaos. A basin of hot water steams in the corner. Clean cloths have been laid out. A woman lies on a straw-stuffed mattress, soaked in sweat, clutching the midwife's hand with the strength of a blacksmith. Her face is pale. Her lips are trembling prayers. Her husband hovers near the doorway, helpless. This is medieval childbirth, a realm dominated not by physicians, but by midwives. Women who learned by doing, who inherited techniques through generations, and who knew the rhythms of labor in a way no university ever taught. You're not here to take charge. You're here to assist. Quietly, humbly, and so you observe. The midwife is already speaking softly to the mother, massaging her belly with warm oil. She's positioned the woman upright, supported by ropes hanging from a beam in the ceiling. Gravity, it turns out, is one of the oldest obstetric tools. Who knew? You hand over clean cloths and try to stay useful. The baby isn't moving much. The midwife frowns, then reaches in gently. Her brow furrows. Breathe. This is bad. She breathes deeply, then begins maneuvering the child by hand. No gloves. No antiseptic. Just skill, courage, and prayers to Saint Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth. Historians still argue whether medieval midwifery was medically sound or dangerously outdated. But watching this woman work, you see something rare, practiced calm in the face of near-certain death. With one final push, a cry. A wet, gurgling, life-affirming cry. The baby is here. The mother sobs. So does the father. You're not sure if it's relief or exhaustion. Probably both. The midwife ties off the umbilical cord with dyed wool and hands the baby to the mother. She's already preparing a warm wash of wine and herbs to prevent infection. You ask what she used. Myrtle and yarrow, she says, and a bit of ash bark for luck. You write it down. Here's the thing. Women have been birthing other humans for millennia without ever asking a man's permission. And yet, medical texts are overwhelmingly written by men who've never stepped inside a birthing chamber. Many of them believe the uterus wanders, literally moves around the body like an unruly goat, causing hysteria, melancholy, or sudden fainting spells. One ancient text warns that the uterus, if not anchored by regular pregnancy, can strangle other organs. You glance at the exhausted mother and decide not to share that theory. Another physician once told you that excessive thought could dry out the womb. You asked if he'd ever met a woman who wasn't thinking constantly. He did not laugh. There's a fringe healer in the next village who claims to predict a child's future by examining the mother's cravings. Pickled onions? Warrior. Gooseberries? Philosopher. Grapes? Beware. You assume he's just hungry. But not all ideas are ridiculous. Some midwives use oils to ease labor, soft music to calm nerves, and herbal baths to reduce tearing. You start taking notes. Still, complications are everywhere. One birth results in twins, one living, one not. The mother weeps into your sleeve. Another woman labors for 3 days. She doesn't survive. The baby does. And in the grim arithmetic of medieval medicine, that counts as a win. You try to introduce a few modern touches, better hand washing, changing linens between births, a bit of iron tonic for blood loss. Some midwives are curious. Others glare at you like you just suggested draining the moon. One day, a noblewoman invites you to oversee her delivery. She has a private chamber, silk sheets, and a small army of whispering maids. You arrive with your satchel, and the midwife rolls her eyes. You can sit over there and look important, she says. So you do. The birth proceeds smoothly until the afterbirth doesn't come. Panic rises. You've read about this. You press gently, massage the abdomen, whisper encouragement. It works. The midwife grudgingly nods her approval. Later, you're handed a tiny purse of coins. You're not sure if it's payment or a bribe to never return. You also begin to see rituals. Some women eat honey cakes before labor. Others tie amulets around their thighs. One wraps her belly in a scarf blessed by Saint Agatha. None of this is in your books, but you start to respect it. One evening, you're called to a hut just outside town. The mother is young. The labor long. You arrive too late. The baby is still. The room is quiet. The midwife doesn't speak. She wraps the infant in linen and places it in the mother's arms. You offer a prayer. It feels small. Back in your own chamber, you jot down notes by candlelight. Birth is holy, terrifying, tender, loud, and no place for arrogance. You start recommending midwives more often. You stop assuming your training always knows best. You trust the women who've done this dozens, hundreds of times. Next morning, there's a knock. A merchant has a fever. He says it started after drinking water from a cursed well. You grab your herbs and head out. But in the back of your mind, something itches. A pattern, a link. Sickness, water, air. Could health really be about something more basic than humors? Something environmental? You stand at the edge of the village well, peering down into the darkness. The bucket creaks as it lowers. The wind smells faintly of mold and something else. Something not right. The merchant who sent for you is curled on his side in a straw bed, fevered and shaking. His wife says he drank from this well just before falling ill. You're no expert on plumbing. No one is, but the water's got a greenish tinge and a smell that doesn't inspire confidence. Back in the clinic, You boil a sample over a flame. It hisses, bubbles, and leaves behind a strange oily film. You poke it with a stick. It pokes back. Here it is: famine, filth, and environmental chaos, the unholy trinity of medieval health hazards. And no matter how many relics you rub on someone's chest, bad water is bad water. You remember the phrase "burn into your notes"? Miasma, bad air. Medieval medicine's default villain. But maybe the air isn't the only culprit. Maybe it's the stew, the ditch water, the spoiled barley. You begin asking questions. The sick often drank from the same place, ate from the same pot, lived next to the same stagnant stream. It clicks into place with a reluctant kind of logic. Sometimes people aren't cursed. They're just unlucky. Or dirty. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians understood contamination or just stumbled into it. But regardless, you're now suspicious of everything moist and communal. Let's talk about hygiene, or the lack thereof. Bathing is inconsistent. Some towns have public bathhouses, which sounds great, until you realize the waters change every other day, and you're soaking with 12 of your sweatiest neighbors. Soap exists, but it's expensive. Common folk wash with sand, ashes, or the occasional splash of rain. Your friend once bragged about his annual bath. His annual bath. One man insists that bathing weakens the body by opening the pores to demons. You remind him that so does drinking from a frog-infested well. He nods, then goes back to scratching his rash. Toilets are optional. Chamber pots are dumped in alleys. Latrines back up. People walk through the mess with bare feet and then prepare dinner. Your gag reflex becomes a regular companion. You're called to treat a baker with boils on his hands. You notice he needs dough between scratching them. You politely suggest gloves. He laughs. You stop buying bread. Then there's the water itself. Wells, cisterns, rain barrels, all lovely breeding grounds for sickness. If it's green, don't drink it. If it wriggles, don't drink it. If it glows, definitely don't drink it. But clean water is rare. Wine is safer, which explains why even children drink it. Beer, too. It's boiled, fermented, and only slightly full of dead yeast. You start prescribing ale for hydration. It makes you very popular. Food doesn't help. Meat is preserved with salt, so much salt that chewing it feels like a workout. Vegetables are seasonal. Bread is a staple, but if the grain goes moldy, it can cause hallucinations. One man sees angels. Another thinks his goat is judging him. You prescribe fasting and a new millstone. There's a strange comfort in routine contamination. People grow up with it. Immune systems toughen. Some children survive purely by accident. Others don't. A fringe theory emerges that poverty protects you. Rich people eat exotic foods, travel, live in big drafty homes. Poor folks eat stale bread, stay put, and live in proximity to bacteria that slowly shape their resilience. Survival by exposure. You start noticing patterns. The healthiest people. The ones who never eat meat unless it's been boiled 3 times. The ones who wash with herbs. The ones who live near fast-flowing streams. The dirtiest places. The wealthiest kitchens. Giant pots of meat stew left uncovered. Bowls reused without cleaning. One noblewoman serves a pie with pigeon beaks still in it. You recommend mint tea and a discreet bucket. Then there's the accidental health advice. Some folk cures are oddly effective. A mixture of vinegar and rosemary keeps away lice. Hanging lavender in doorways lowers insect bites. Chewing certain barks eases fevers. You begin collecting these not-so-terrible ideas. You start boiling your water, just in case. You wash your hands with lye. You stop accepting stew from strangers. One afternoon, you treat a shepherd who's somehow never been sick. He lives alone, drinks from a spring, eats onions and bread, and avoids crowds. You start considering early retirement to the hills. But then a celebration, a harvest festival, music, dancing, roasting meat, wine barrels open wide. Everyone shares food. Everyone drinks from the same ladle. It's beautiful. It's joyful. And within days, the cough returns. You trace it back. Shared plates, shared cups, the hugging, the shouting, the goat races. You don't even want to think about what that one guy did with the apple cider. You suggest future festivals have hand-washing stations. Everyone laughs. You weren't joking. But amid the mess, there's a glimmer of progress. A few healers start boiling instruments. Midwives use fresh linens. Even the barber surgeon starts wiping his tools with alcohol-soaked cloth. You pretend not to cry. You're right, cleanliness doesn't cure everything. But filth sure doesn't help. In the distance, you hear talk of a distant land, far to the south, where doctors have libraries, wash before surgery, and even perform eye operations. You pack your notes. You're going to find out if it's true. The journey south is long, dusty, and filled with bad soup. But the stories keep you moving. Whispers of clean hospitals, wise doctors, and books. So many books. You cross mountains, wade through rivers, past spice caravans and sun-bleached ruins until at last, the city rises on the horizon like a mirage carved in marble and sun. You've arrived in Al-Andalus, the heart of Islamic medicine. It's like stepping into another timeline. Here in cities like Cordoba, Toledo, and Baghdad farther east, medicine isn't just practiced. It's studied, tested, written about, and this part almost makes you weep questioned. Public hospitals, called bimaristans, welcome patients without asking for coins, goats, or confessions. They are clean, organized, calm. And the doctors? They wash their hands. You're assigned a translator because while your Latin is excellent, these scholars speak Arabic and write in scripts that flow like poetry across the page. You're handed a copy of Al-Zarawi's medical compendium, a multi-volume behemoth full of detailed diagrams, surgical techniques, and tool descriptions, so precise you wonder if this man traveled through time and stole your future textbooks. You sit in lectures, not recitations of Galen, but critical discussions. Does the body contain four humors? One scholar asks. Possibly, another replies, but let's test that theory. You resist the urge to burst into applause. Here, you learn about Ibn Sina, known to the West as Avicenna. His canon of medicine is treated with reverence and scrutiny. He describes contagious disease, the idea of quarantine, and even the roles of diet, sleep, and emotions in health. He doesn't wave crystals at people. He builds frameworks. Historians still argue how much of this advanced knowledge filtered into Europe at the time. But one thing is certain, you are filtering it in. You visit the hospitals, rooms with individual beds, tiled floors, ventilation, and even divisions by illness. Fevers in one ward, broken bones in another. Music plays softly in recovery rooms, not for entertainment, but because someone noticed that calm patients tend to survive more often. You see surgeries, real ones. A doctor removes a bladder stone with tools you've only read about in badly copied Latin. Another resets a broken leg using a pulley and weights. No incantations. No Mars and Aquarius nonsense. Just physics and anatomy. You ask to observe dissection. Your host hesitates, then allows it under supervision. The body is not desecrated, but respected. You see a heart. A real one. Not a symbolic fire-shaped icon, but an actual muscular pump. You touch along. You see the complexity. You understand for the first time how the body truly works. Back in your lodgings, you copy diagrams by candlelight. You make notes about wound care, herbs with antibacterial properties, and irrigation systems that keep water clean. You weep softly over the memory of that frog-flavored village well. One scholar introduces you to Rhazes, a Persian physician who distinguished smallpox from measles, advocated for ethical treatment of the mentally ill, and insisted doctors record their failures as well as their successes. You write that last part in all capitals. Because in your country, no one admits failure. They just blame Saturn. There are libraries here that take your breath away. Scrolls, tomes, folios, thousands of texts meticulously copied and stored. You see Greek knowledge preserved, expanded, corrected. You begin to realize that in the chaos of post-Roman Europe, much of medicine paused, while in the Islamic world, it evolved. There's a fringe theory floating around in Europe that these southern scholars got their knowledge from fallen angels. You can't help but laugh. If angels are handing out medical wisdom, they're doing a far better job down here. You taste new herbs, turmeric, tamarind, cardamom. Each has a role in healing. You watch how doctors mix these into pastes and tonics with measurements, actual proportions, not a splash here and a guess there. You note the importance placed on patient observation. You're told to watch the eyes, the skin tone, the posture. To listen not just to the words, but to the breathing between them. The patients speak with trust, not because they've been promised miracles, but because they've been treated like thinking humans. It's a jarring, beautifully jarring. One evening, you attend a medical debate. Two doctors argue about the causes of epilepsy. One blames the brain, the other suggests the heart's rhythm. Neither invokes demons. The moderator simply says, "Let us test both ideas." You drop your quill in shock. You try to contribute to the discussion. You mention trepanning. Everyone stares. You mention powdered emeralds. The youngest doctor chokes on his tea, but they don't laugh. They ask you to explain. And when you do, they listen, not to judge, but to understand how medicine is failing elsewhere. You feel seen. You feel embarrassed. You feel determined. You're given copies of text to bring home. You start translating. You dream of a future where Islamic, Jewish, and Christian knowledge can build something better together. Then, one morning, your host calls you to the gates. A messenger has arrived from the north. There's trouble. Again. A king is ill. A very powerful king. And his court physician has no idea what to do. They're calling for you. You close your book. You wrap your scrolls. You begin the long journey back, armed with ink, diagrams, and just enough Arabic to mispronounce spleen charmingly. This time you're not guessing. This time you're bringing something better than hope. The palace looms ahead, all turrets and trembling servants. It's cold here, colder than you remember, and the wind whips through the courtyard like it has business of its own. A page boy leads you through dim stone hallways, murmuring about omens and sleepless nights. A scribe follows behind, clutching a sheaf of fresh parchment. The king is ill, very ill, and no one knows why. You enter his chamber. The fire crackles weakly. Curtains are drawn. The king lies on a massive feather bed, pale as beeswax, lips cracked, pupils sluggish. 3 physicians hover nearby, visibly sweating. One is consulting a book of saints, another is sniffing a handful of rosemary, and the third is trying to locate Venus in the sky through a small window. You resist the urge to sigh. They nod when you enter. Reluctantly, you're the outsider, the traveler, the one who talks about washing hands and boiling tools, the one who's seen other ways. They don't like that, but the king's still dying, and desperation is an excellent conversation starter. You ask to examine him. They hesitate, then gesture vaguely as if hoping you'll get it over with quickly. You begin, pulse weak, breath shallow, skin warm, clammy. He groans when touched near the ribs. You ask for a urine sample. They hand you a chamber pot. Progress. You examine it, this time without referencing a zodiac chart. You boil it slightly. You note its scent, color, residue. You don't taste it. Thank heaven for progress. Then you ask a few simple questions. What did he eat? Where has he been? Who else is sick? The answers unravel like old rope. He's been feasting heavily on meat meals, drinking sweet wine, refusing sleep. Half his court has similar symptoms. You check the kitchens. You almost pass out from the smell. One of the wine casks is teeming with mold. The eel pies are at least a week old. You find a dog chewing something you very much hope is not human. The diagnosis is clear: food poisoning. Maybe dysentery. Maybe worse. But the other physicians aren't convinced. It could be a planetary disturbance, one says, or a bad humoral flux, says another. You draw a simple chart. It's a list: what went in, what came out, what went wrong. A queen understands immediately. So he poisoned himself with indulgence, she mutters. Typical. You prescribe fasting, hydration with boiled water infused with mint, rest, and a ban on all fish pies for at least a fortnight. You cleanse the room. You demand linens be changed. You even recommend airing the chamber, a shocking suggestion met with visible horror. One doctor crosses himself. You open the window anyway. Within days, the king improves. Slightly, then steadily. Eventually, he's sitting up, muttering about dreams and demanding cheese. You're a miracle worker. Or, as one lady in waiting whispers, possibly a wizard. You don't correct her. And yet, despite the clear improvement, the court remains skeptical. You begin to notice paranoia. One night, your notes go missing. Another evening, your herbal satchel is misplaced. You're being watched. Politeness is thin. Smiles are sharp. You realize that you've disrupted a hierarchy. Court physicians aren't just healers. They're political tools, symbols of power. If a foreigner with a satchel and foreign books can do what they cannot, their value decreases. Their reputations fracture. Their influence dissolves. You're a threat. Historians still argue whether court physicians were primarily medical experts or just glorified courtiers. The truth is, they were both. Paid to look wise, sound confident, and above all, not fail publicly. You begin to feel the pressure. Every patient you help, every rash you soothe, every fever you reduce, it all increases the tension. Then the king asks for you. Privately, you kneel at his bedside. He asks what saved him. You pause, then answer honestly: clean water, simple food, good rest. He laughs. Then he says, "You won't last long here with answers like that." You nod, because you know he's right. You prepare to leave. You write your findings in careful script. You gift the court a copy of Ibn Sina's canon, translated as best you can. You include instructions, basic hygiene, food preparation guidelines, herbal charts. One of the younger physicians, a quiet man with soft hands and sharp eyes, thanks you. He promises to keep reading. You believe him. On your way out, you stop at the monastery library. You're shocked. In the quiet candlelight, you see monks copying medical texts, not just Christian ones, but Arabic, Greek, Jewish. The script is crammed, but careful. Diagrams are drawn with reverence. Margins include notes, corrections. You realize that while kings fall ill and courts resist change, these monks, hunched over ink and parchment, might be the ones preserving real medicine. It's slow, but steady. You leave a few of your own notes. You correct one diagram. You add a recipe for thyme sage wash to the back of a copied herbal guide. You draw a smiling face in the corner. You don't explain it. You ride away in the morning. Your saddle aches. Your bag is heavier now, not with relics or leeches, but with hope. You pass villages. Some are cleaner. Some are not. One barber surgeon shows you a bandage soaked in wine and garlic. He says it works faster now. You smile. There are still miles to go. Patients to guess about, wounds to clean, and probably more people blaming their coughs on witches. But something is changing. You feel it. Crawl. Creak. A wheezy shuffle. A slow lurch toward modernity. You travel now with a different posture. Not arrogance, not certainty, but a quiet confidence. Like someone who's finally seen behind the curtain and found not wizards, but scribes with steady hands. And you keep returning to the monasteries. Because while kings choke on eel pies and nobles mistake indigestion for divine punishment, the monks copy. Quietly, patiently. They sit under candlelight, hunched over parchment, scraping quills and grinding ink from oak galls and iron salts. And they preserve everything. Galen, Hippocrates, Avicenna, raises. Even your scribbled notes on time compresses, and why plague masks smell like dead flowers. Here in these chilly stone cloisters, progress doesn't gallop. It tiptoes. You sit beside a young monk one evening. He's copying a page from an old herbal, carefully drawing a daisy with 5 petals. It's not accurate, he admits softly, but it's prettier this way. You know it. Medieval accuracy is often subject to aesthetics. One night, he shows you a mistake. Someone long ago miscopied mint as mildew in a potion recipe. The result? A sleep tonic that causes rashes. It's been passed down for generations. You both laugh. Then you both correct it. Historians still argue whether monastic scribes were passive recorders or subtle editors. You've seen enough to believe the answer is both. Some simply copy. Others gently tweak. Nudge knowledge forward like monks in an eternal relay race. Not all books survive. A fire at one abbey destroys 3 shelves of rare texts. A flood ruins another. You weep for pages that will never be rewritten. But then a brother pulls from his robe a tiny leather-bound copy of the Book of Simple Medicines. He saved it. I like the part about onions, he says. It's not all noble parchment and preserved wisdom, though. You also treat monks with digestive issues, too much cheese, back pain, too much praying, and mysterious ailments that you suspect come from boredom and boiled cabbage fatigue. And while monks preserve texts, kings continue dying. You're summoned again. Different kingdom. Different noble. Same drama. This time the prince insists he's cursed. You arrive to find him recovering from a healing ceremony involving candle wax and goat's blood. You prescribe bed rest and diluted wine. He recovers, swears you're a genius, and resumes jousting before the week's end. You try to leave, but your reputation has grown. Slowly, your name travels. Sometimes in reverent whispers, sometimes in rumors. The doctor who washes hands. The man who talks to Muslims. The one who poked the king's urine with a stick and lived. You receive a letter, neatly folded, sealed with wax. It's from a fellow physician. He's heard about your journey, your translations. He wants to learn. You agree to meet, and you meet more. In Paris, in Bologna, in Prague. Quiet men and women who are tired of mumbling through astrology charts. They want something real. Something that works. Together, you begin recopying. You translate from Arabic to Latin. You rework diagrams. You discuss infections. You argue civilly about spleens. You draw. You annotate. You even try to invent new terms, though gut heat never really catches on. And then, one snowy morning, you hear about a man with a lens. He lives far off in the Low Countries. He's been staring through glass at tiny things. Things smaller than gnats. Smaller than flea eggs. Things alive. You squint at the messenger. Like worms. No, he replies. Smaller. You sit with that thought for a long time. Could it be? Could the illnesses, boils, coughs, sudden deaths, be caused not by sin or imbalance or curses, but by invisible creatures? You don't know it yet, but you've brushed against the edge of germ theory, still centuries from being proven. Still ignored. Still whispered. But the seed is there. Planted. Back at the monastery, you stare at a blank page. Then slowly begin to write. What if disease is not always a punishment, not always a balance of humors or moods, But a living thing that moves from one body to another, you don't publish it. Not yet, but you keep writing. One day, a barber surgeon knocks on your door. He heard you know how to keep wounds clean. He asks for help. You show him how to boil his knives. He nods, then casually sharpens one with a whetstone he's had since childhood. You ask if he's ever nicked a bone. Only once, he says. It screamed. You change the subject. Still, you're encouraged. More practitioners are asking questions, trading notes, testing instead of simply repeating. Slowly, medicine is crawling out of its own shadow. But you also know there's a long way to go. People still drink stagnant water. They still pray to bones. They still eat questionable pies. A woman in a nearby village insists her goat cured her son's measles by sneezing into his soup. You let it slide. Because sometimes belief helps. Sometimes luck wins. And sometimes, just sometimes, guesswork becomes knowledge. You're older now. Not ancient, just creaky. Your knees complain in the morning. Your eyes squint more often than not. You still carry your satchel, though it sags with wear. Inside are frayed scrolls, wrinkled herbs, a chipped ink pot, and a notebook thick with years of thoughts. Some pages are stained with wine, others with blood. One, inexplicably, with what might be plum jam. You walk slower through town now, but people still recognize you. Children tug at your sleeve, asking you to check their coughs. Adults bow slightly and offer thanks for things you barely remember doing. You never wore a crown, never claimed to be a miracle worker. But somewhere along the line, you became a bridge between what was and what might be. And you've seen it all. You've watched patients bleed under leeches, cough themselves hoarse over chamber pots, tremble under the weight of curses. You've guessed at humors, tested herbs, read omens, soothed fears, and prayed, not for answers, but for the strength to keep asking. You remember when books were rare. Now they're being copied faster. Stored in new libraries. Carried on carts. Translated. Discussed. Disputed. And slowly, so slowly, you've seen the torch passed. A young midwife stops you one day and shows you her notes. They're cleaner than yours, neater. She's mapped her town's births, tracked herbs used, and even sketched the positions of breech deliveries. You ask where she learned this. She says, from a woman who said she learned it from a man who once traveled south. You smile. You're not the only one anymore. In a nearby town, someone builds a new kind of hospital with separate wards, clean linens, and a small room just for reading. In another, a young doctor experiments with boiling his surgical thread. In yet another, a friar proposes that invisible creatures might cause decay. No one believes him. Not yet. But you remember the man with the lens. You return to the monastery, just once more, to visit the scriptorium. The same monk is still there, now with grayer hair and thicker glasses. He's copying your notebook. You hadn't even asked. He just shrugged and said, it seemed worth saving. You don't have a grand theory. You don't write a sweeping medical doctrine. You never wear silk or speak to emperors. But in your final notes, you jot something simple. Sometimes the cure is simply listening. And then trying. And trying again. Because guesswork is where healing starts, but it's not where it ends. You lie awake one night, staring at the rafters as rain ticks gently on the roof. You think of every patient you held, every wound you washed, every ridiculous diagnosis you made with a straight face and a pounding heart. Crocodile dung, moon charts, saintly toenails, garlic bandages, heated wine, rotten eel, and somehow, out of that chaos, a future began to take shape. A future of microscopes, of vaccines, of sterile gloves and stethoscopes, and names for diseases you could only describe as the gasping shakes. You'll never see it, but you've touched its roots, and that is enough. And now, dear listener, you feel it too, don't you? The soft hush of a world long gone. The flickering torchlight, the clink of iron tongs, the rustle of parchment under tired fingers. It all fades now, slowly, gently, like steam rising from a warm bowl of broth in a darkened room. Let it slip away. Let the frantic energy of leeches and lunar charts melt into the quiet certainty of the pillow beneath your head. Let the strange smell of boiled nettles and vinegar give way to the comfort of your own breath, moving in and out, steady, slow. You've walked through centuries tonight, through candlelit wards and foggy fields. You've stood beside monks, midwives, barbers, and baffled kings. You've whispered to patience and scribbled in margins. You've guessed, doubted, and hoped, always hoped. And now your work is done. You don't need to remember every step, every cure, every herb and charm and chart. They'll keep without you. For now, you only need to rest. Let the world dim. Let the noises soften. Let the medieval moon hang above you like a paper lantern in a quiet chapel sky. Tomorrow, the modern world will wait. But tonight, you are part of an older one, muddier, messier, warmer. So close your eyes, unclench your thoughts, and drift. The leeches won't bite. The potions won't spill. The patients are all sleeping now, just like you.